I'm Colin Irwin, and I was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award for inventing peace poles by WAPO Asia Pacific. So let me tell you all about making peace using poles. I can't take all the credit for this. I learnt about making peace from the Inuit in the Canadian Arctic. They lived in such a hostile environment that for them, war would have been mutual assured destruction, mad. This is because young males were being killed off so frequently by hunting accidents that if they started having war, there would be no Inuit. So they had many mechanisms for stopping war. They had the same language from Alaska to Greenland. You could only say, let us murder many people. There's no word for war. They don't have chiefs. And important decisions are made by consensus, which means everybody in a political situation is a successful politician when they can find out what the consensus is and help people come to it. So polling was first used in a war zone during the Second World War by the Americans in Italy. They wanted to know if they invaded Italy, would they have to fight the Germans and the Italians or just the Germans? Turns out Gallup said, fine, you only have to fight the Germans. So they invaded, and that was that. I then started to use polling as a tool for peace posters, is to try and scale up what the Inuit did from small communities to a nation state in Northern Ireland in 96. Fortunately, at that time, the British and Irish governments very wisely had elections to negotiations so that all the parties to the conflict would be in the negotiations. If you got 1% of the vote, you got one delegate. And so even the small parties with paramilitaries got in. We then had three rules for running peace polls. One is all the parties, which was all 10 delegates, had to agree and draft all the questions together. So nobody could say that was the wrong question. Then all the communities, all the peoples had to be asked all the questions. So no one could criticize the methodology or the sample. And then all the results had to be made public so that nobody could walk away from it and say, well, you didn't ask the right question, you didn't do that. It really gave the people of Northern Ireland a seat at the negotiating table. Now, in the negotiating, we had a special negotiator scale. If something was essential, it really had to be in the deal, otherwise it wasn't going to work. Desirable and acceptable was good. Tolerable was very important. That means I don't want it, but for peace, I'll put up with it. Unacceptable is the other end of the scale. That means if it's in there, I'm going to carry on fighting. Here's an example of using that scale. We did hundreds of items, and this is the one dealing with relationships between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. The Protestants really didn't want to be bothered with this. So 29% of them said, we really don't require this. On the other end of the scale, option six, 69% of Catholics said if we don't have something, this isn't going to work and it's not going to be a deal. The deal that actually ended up in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was that they could get together on matters of mutual interest, but they would have to be legislated separately in the North and the South. That was objected to in option three by 49% of the Protestants, and it just squeezed through. It was the compromise that worked. So then everything was published. It was all transparent. There were nine polls done over a period of uh, 6 months or to 2 years with implementation, and so far so good. The people of Northern Ireland will not be going back to war. Now, more recently, I've been using artificial intelligence with the United Nations with a company called Remesh AI. And basically, the AI does the same thing as the Peace Polls does. You ask questions, you get answers. Here's a question that we ran in Libya. What are the most important issues to focus on for the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum, which they were setting up to try and resolve the conflict there? And between the East and the West, Benghazi and Tripoli, things that they could agree to, according to the artificial intelligence, were keeping some of the people out of the negotiations who were spoilers, provide jobs. The Constitution had to be settled, and so on and so on. And essentially, this AI does what the peace polls did. However, these dialogues could be run in real time. And on one occasion, we broadcast on Facebook, then that was broadcast on television, and we got a 1.4 million audience, which was about a third of the Libyan population. It's quite a small population, and that led to a ceasefire, all in real time. The polling, I never did anything under less than 2 weeks, and some of them took many months, but this is all in real time. Then I started working with my colleagues at Remesh AI with OpenAI to write constitutions for artificial intelligence. And writing a constitution for artificial intelligence is very similar to writing a peace agreement. So the process was like this. We would ask the public in America what they would consider to be a suitable set of regulations for the artificial intelligence to follow. We would then refine that using GPT-4. We would then take that to some experts to tweak it and make sure we hadn't left anything important out. Then we'd run that past the public again and get their feedback. And we do this a couple of times and then run it past the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to make sure we had no conflict there. And we would end up with a constitution for any particular topic we were dealing with. And here's the constitution for artificial intelligence for dealing with questions about war and conflict. And there's lots of things here about epistemic transparency, prioritize facts and evidence, balance context, user well, lots of regulations, and it works quite well. And we produced this constitution in 2 weeks. Here's another peace agreement. This one is done by Khalil Shikaki for Israel and Palestine. It probably took him a year or two to perfect it. And he's added a couple more clauses more recently on regional security and implementation. But we could write a peace agreement like this, I think, in a couple of weeks in any conflict in the world using the methods that we developed with OpenAI. The problem with all of this is that although it was inclusive, transparent, and accountable in Northern Ireland, the peace polls that I've done around the world since then mostly have not been inclusive, transparent, and accountable. And this is particularly true of the United Nations and the dialogues we ran there in Libya, Haiti, Iraq, Lebanon. The problem there is that the UN very rarely publish stuff because they're very sensitive about criticism and thinking about what's happened recently in Israel and Palestine. I think one can understand that. So when I tried to run a peace poll in Syria, the head of the UN mission refused to do it because he was concerned that it would produce some criticism of the UN. So, which is probably true, but one has to kind of take that. And so the difficulty here is that the UN and the OSCE, because of the vetoes that the Permanent Five have, or all members of the OSCE have a veto, they do not want to upset their members, their member states. So, in addition to not being able to make and keep peace in the world, they cannot do effective peace research. I'm hoping that artificial general intelligence, when it comes along, might be able to get around this problem. But then who will control artificial general intelligence? It might be possible with AGI to say, well, can you please draw me up a peace agreement for this particular conflict? They would then tap into the 20 plus million OpenAI users, which is virtually a global panel. They might be able to run the kind of dialogues that we ran over a couple of weeks and come up with a solution. But then they might say, I'm sorry, but I'm not permitted to do that. It depends who's controlling the AGI. And so far, with the UN, although we've been using very good artificial intelligence tools, it hasn't worked out because it's not independent, it's not inclusive, it's not transparent, and it's not accountable. So here are some links to books and articles and a podcast. So please tap into these links and explore this a lot if you would like to, and figure out how we can get over the problem of people not wanting to make peace when they really do need to make peace. Thank you.